So there's two reasons why there's three of us here. One is I was hoping there'll be more presenters than the audience. And the second one is, if I get embarrassed, I'm just going to run away and hand it over to these guys. Yep. So be gentle with us. So, I was getting worried about this because there's quite a few people around here that I know of and have read their blogs, etc. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to speak in front of them. What if they don't like what I say? And then I thought, well, this is a case study, right? So as long as I tell you how it is, there's nothing to be worried about. So what me, Dragan Jojic, and my colleagues Steve Tendon and Alex Gray will do is basically take you through the last 14 months of our client's journey that we have spent with them and concentrate on the areas that are going to be relevant to you. So the use of Lean, Kanban and TameFlow tools to help the change in the organization. So what we are going to cover is I'm going to give you a bit of a background, and then we're going to move into how the change looked at the team level, at the program level, and at the leadership level of the organization. What is it that they have been doing and how the whole thing has been flowing? And then finally, we're going to talk about the next steps. What are the things that we think are going to happen next? What are the likely things that we are going to concentrate next in our work with the client? All three of us have been working with them, are still working with the same client. So when we were going to go there first and meet them, this is the summary of, this is the whole situation was set up basically and resulted from the fact that there's a CTO, an incoming CTO, and incoming managing director of the online division that came in and wanted to change things, wanted to make the organization better responsive to their clients. I'll tell you more about it in a second. But they had a big vision, and that big vision was prompted by, or advised, or influenced by some of the things that you're probably familiar with, some of you at least. So the Spotify model that Henrik Nyberg wrote about, the adaptive leadership that Jim Highsmith talked about. So their big vision was to make the organization which will be more adaptive, more responsive, more agile. But they also realized that they need to start small, they need to start from one place, ideally from one team, and grow from there. And finally, the recognition of the need for sustainable pace was what was informing their approach as well. So let's move as fast as we can, as fast as the organization can sustain it. The initial challenges that we have been presented with, that we have been advised of, again, I don't think will surprise any of you. So they were briefing us about the fact that everything looked quite interconnected. So where the hell should we start? Where is this small change? Where is this small start supposed to be? And yet be independent and autonomous enough to be able to be acted on by itself. And then there was quite a lot of work in progress. So how do we optimize that existing work? How do we continue delivering value, delivering working software, while learning new capability, while increasing the capability? And also, how do we adjust the local initiatives to the global context? So this is really the picture of the initial challenges we were presented with. Now, the organization is a fairly large FTSE 100, very well established organization in its industry. And the industry is very competitive. So their key recognition was they need to be responsive, they need to change in order to be able to remain competitive in their industry. So what happened? So the start small bit is in March 2013, we started working with one particular team within one particular program. And it took us about 4 months before we then migrated to the next level or started working with another team within the same program. So sustainable pace, we could have probably tried to push harder. The organization wasn't ready for that. So 4 months after that or thereabouts, we scaled, or they scaled their change to the program level. And over the last 4 to 5 months, we also started working with another program in the organization as well as with the leadership to try to help them adjust, change, evolve their behavior. So that is the journey for the last 14 months. That is the summary of that journey. Let's next go into the detail, starting with Alex telling you about how the program board, the project board, the team board of one of his teams evolved over a period of time.
Thank you. Afternoon. So as Dragan mentioned, we started off with one team in one location. I actually joined with the second team, so the project was already underway, part of the program was already underway. There was a big backlog of user stories. Prior to our engagement, our client had embarked on a big analysis, and they'd created over 500 user stories just for the one project I was working on. And we started off using traditional Scrum. We followed the normal process of sprint planning, sprint review, retrospective. We had a fairly standard sprint board. And that was going well for the first few sprints. And it started to get more difficult as we got into more of the detail of the product we were delivering. The problem we encountered was sprint planning sessions tended to take at least half a day during a 2-week sprint, so they were starting to become quite weighty for our sprint. And we were also getting a lot of change during the sprint, so of the work we'd done for that half a day, a lot of it was wasted because we changed user stories in and out during the sprint. It was becoming quite wasteful. Also, I found it quite strange, but the management were trying to monitor the effectiveness of the team by measuring velocity against stories delivered, so we were more interested in making sure the number of points that we'd estimated matched velocity. It started becoming a bit silly, and we decided we wanted to move to more of a flow-based approach. In fact, the team really wanted to move to a flow-based approach, so we stopped using full Scrum and we moved to more of a typical Kanban type approach. So we first of all mapped our process. We started off with a column of to-do items. We then had our first stage in our process, which was to investigate the user stories. This is where we delved into the depths of what was needed to be done to complete that user story, defined any acceptance criteria, those sorts of things. We then moved on to a design stage. This is where there may have been a UI design review, technical design review, and tasks were broken down into development tasks, testing tasks, those sorts of things. So you can imagine these two parts of the process were what used to be done during the half-a-day planning session, but we've now made that part of the process for our user stories and tickets. We then would have moved into an execute, and this is where the actual work would be completed. So if it's a development task, developers would do whatever it is they do, or testers or architects might write documents or create test scripts, those sorts of things. We then had a verify column, and this is where we're checking that what has been delivered in execute meets the acceptance criteria that had been defined during the investigate task. And finally, we had product owner sign-off, which was just like a final tick in the box to make sure that the product owner was happy with the user story that had been developed before it said that it was done. You can see on our board we've got at the moment 2 different types of tickets. We've got a pink ticket at the moment, that means a user story, and a white ticket was a task, and in some cases a subtask of the user story. We did initially create some work in progress limits, but at this stage they were very much a finger in the air.
Task and subtask, was it stories, task, and then a subtask of the task?
This was very early in our adoption, so we did have the concept of tasks and subtasks going through the system, but when we got to design, that was where we also may have created subtasks of a user story as well, the development tasks.
So the tasks and stories are on the same thing?
Yes, at the moment, but later on in our process they become slightly different. We also had the concept, you can't see it very well, but these are little red magnets on tasks to identify things that were blocked, so something that we couldn't progress for some reason. So this was our first attempt at our Kanban board. We then evolved this slightly. So firstly, the block tasks, the team decided that they didn't have enough information about what was causing the block by just having the magnet on it. So we added a small post-it note which had a short description of what the blocker was and who was working on it. And we also created 2 or more different types of tickets. So we've got a blue ticket for task. So this is where task and subtask can now be seen as different tickets. And we also created a yellow ticket to identify any defects that were flowing through our system. The other thing we added at this stage was our process policies. So these are the rules that determine when something can move from the work in progress column into the done column within each of our steps in the process. So if you've met all of these rules at this stage in the process, you can say something's done. So we have here things like acceptance criteria is defined. Here, technical review has been done. In execute, peer review has been done, those sorts of things. That's that stage. So then a few weeks later, it was becoming quite apparent at our stand-up, we were constantly going, who's working on that task? So the obvious thing to do was visualise that. So we've now created little avatars for each person. So just got a picture of their face, or in some cases, their cat, whichever they liked. So you could quite easily see who was working on each task. We also only created 3 avatars for each person, so that gives them a sort of a personal width, so they could only possibly be working on 3 items. And there was another subtle change at this stage, which we changed the wording from the queues here. These are the queues. We changed it from done, which felt like a good thing, to ready for, which made it sound a bit more like a queue. At this stage in the process, we were quite happy with our board, so this change, we've actually just used lining tape on the board. So it's made the board more permanent, and we've also, you can't see it, but we're constantly reviewing our process policies as well, so we've made some alterations to our process policies. Final one. So having made the board nice and permanent, we then went and got another board which was slightly bigger. Great. So some of the changes on this is fairly recent, so we've added some green tickets onto the board now, so it's another ticket type. The green tickets are actually our improvement tasks. So out of our retrospectives, we're still doing those every 2 weeks. Any improvement ideas that we've come up with get added to the board as part of the backlog, and improvement ideas can flow through the board as well, consuming work in progress where necessary. We've also given the team a bit more of a view of the upcoming items in the backlog, so we've added our sort of near items in the backlog to the beginning of the board. But also, the more important change is towards the other side of the board. Previously, our board finished at the done stage, and done meant development done, but we weren't therefore then visualising the flow of the tickets through our UAT through into the live environment, getting the tickets from beginning right to end. And we were struggling to get some of our releases through because things like the business weren't ready to take on this part of the process, this part of the product without another piece, and we were struggling with having agreement of what could make up a release. So this is where I think we created the notion of a release package, and I shall hand over to Steve now to talk a little bit more.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Steve Tendon. Before we proceed, I'd like to go back to this slide. What we have seen so far is what we've been doing at the team level for improving the flow of work through the system. And we'll start now looking at what we've done in order to improve the focus of one of the most scarcest resources in any company, and that is management attention. Though we were working from the bottom up. Alex showed you what he did with one of his teams. We've been doing that with other teams as well, and we are now at the phase where we want to scale this to the program level. But we're still working with teams, so we need to create mechanism so that we get feedback loops flowing through these two levels. So one of these mechanisms is the minimal marketable release, also known as the minimal marketable feature set, which you probably are familiar with, and you would consider that exactly as Alex said, as a package of work for the team to deliver. But it is much more than that. And the key words are really minimality and marketability. It is important because this package of work becomes also a unit of business value. So there we have this word, business value, 2 words. And this creates like one of the key missing links which will help you to create the feedback loops between management and developers. Now remember, this was a traditional organization, so there was a PMO office in place with many project managers, and they still needed to exist in the organization, so they needed to make their reports on a daily basis. And for the project manager, the MMR was the mechanism to communicate with the teams that were progressing towards this more agile, lean way of working. And at the same time, we connect this to the actual financial performance of the teams. So the MMR becomes a unit of financial throughput. I want to stress this point that minimality and marketability are 2 opposing forces. You, from a cost perspective, you want to do as little as possible. So you want to reduce scope to the minimum thing you can get away with. But at the same time, marketability, the competitive landscape, the ambitions of the product owner are an opposing force. You want to add as much as possible to your delivery. These 2 opposing forces need to find a balance. When it's just right, you know you can work on this MMR with the support of both the business side and the marketing side. Notice that this has also quite some implications in terms of how you might do risk management, especially if you come from a Scrum background where the ordinary risk management policy is to do the backlog grooming or de-scoping. If you're using an MMR, you cannot de-scope because you wouldn't be able to market. So what we are defining here are a fixed scope unit of delivery. How did we do that? Well, in practice, we started with backlogs the teams already had. We partitioned them into things, groups of features that were marketable, and determined a sequence of delivery of those MMRs. This sequence is not cast in stone. This is where you still have the options of all agile approaches that you can change order of the units of work you're dealing with. In this case, it's MMRs. The only thing that is determined is MMR1, or the topmost, because that is where you will focus all the attention of delivery teams. Notice also that if you're familiar with the original book that described the MMFs, the minimum marketable features, you should know that the sequence of these MMRs can have humongous impact on the business performance. Doing MMR1 first and MMR2 rather than the reverse can have a very big impact on the bottom line. Now we have to say we did not do those exercises at this stage. They are yet to come. But what is important is that the teams started working with MMRs. Now, most of these teams were always requested to express estimates, and you know how well that exercise goes. So we tried to move to a no estimates approach, and in particular to use a probabilistic forecasting method for arriving at determining the due dates which were promised to management. What we're doing here is that we divide the backlog in work types. If you're in Kanban, you will start to recognize the concept of class of service, but it's not quite there yet. And then we did relative sizing, so t-shirt sizing is another term. And we looked at the history of those work types and those sizes and saw the due date performance distributions, did some summations, and tried to find the average delivery time for that NMR, for that package of work. What we want to do next comes from the critical chain project management method of the theory of constraints, which usually is in two parts. One is the estimation part and the other one is the execution part. Well, we dropped the estimation part of CCPM because we did just what I showed you, the probabilistic forecasting, so we had some estimates to go with. But then we want to use the execution part of CCPM. And how does that work? Well, when we have determined the average flow time, we take half of that and add it at the end as a buffer. Because this distribution is skewed, by this mechanism, you will reach a due date which is around the 80–85% of delivery. So it's a very trustworthy date, and that is the date that gets promised to the business. We are trying to instill a mechanism by which the dates that are promised will be kept.
80% of the time?
Sorry?
80% of the time?
Even more, potentially, hopefully. So the mechanism in this combination of Kanban incremental funding method and theory of constraints is basically summarized in this diagram. We have our work in process for the MMR, the estimated time, the 50% due date, which is there, the buffer which we add to the end of that, and then on a daily basis we look at how much work we've done to date, or that one, how much time has progressed, and we do a linear projection to find whereabout we are in this buffer. We then compare the percentage of work done with respect to the whole amount of work with the percentage of consumption of this buffer. We can visualize this in a number of ways, and the whole idea, if I go back a slide, is this, that as long as you are in the green, you're fine. You are certainly delivery on time. When you are in amber, yellow, you should start analyzing the situation and think about why you are there. And if you then happen to go over in red, that's when you should act upon the situation. And probably you will put into place the things that you have thought about while you were in amber. So it is a very relaxed way of working. When you have a transition, green to amber, you start to do some analysis, maybe even deep root cause analysis, if that is necessary. But you prepare to act. And then when you get the signal that you are in trouble or approaching trouble, you will act. Now, as I was saying, this buffer consumption can be visualized in many ways. This is the classical diagram from the critical chain project management of theory of constraints, where you compare literally the two percentages. This one is probably the one you will recognize mostly, because it is basically a cumulative flow diagram where we are just plotting the done line. Imagine that in front of here you have the other lines, and we are showing the buffer on the delivery line of the MMR. What we have also done here, and which the teams liked a lot, is to show with this cyan line, like the linear projection of the latest reporting time. This morning, Dan mentioned reliable Scrum. Reliable Scrum is a variation of this, where instead of having a burn up chart, you have a burn down chart, but you still visualize the buffer in a similar way. This diagram is the one that I prefer personally. It is a buffer control chart, and we have like the green zone here, the yellow zone here, and the red zone here. And why do I prefer this one to the other ones, even if the other ones are more colorful, is that with this representation, you can see trends that develop very, very early. So you get very early signals of oncoming trouble. With these early signals, you can start the retrospective action of thinking about why a trouble is approaching even earlier. So this is extremely valuable when you are in dealing with really time-critical applications. Now, how does this reflect on the boards? Well, here we have the first team that transitioned to the MMR, and you can see that the team was doing t-shirt sizing. Actually, you can tell it was a Scrum Master that did this, because he's using chickens. You know, the chickens are pigs, and chickens of growing sizes. He also had an epic and represented that with a turkey, but it's not on there. And what is most revealing is what we have in this area. Because this is where we are plotting on a daily basis at the stand-up. Before the stand-up, the Scrum Master comes in and puts the daily, well, chicken on the buffer. Actually, he was even more creative. He used an unfeathered chicken when it was in yellow, and even a roasted chicken when it was in red. But eventually said, well, no, let's just use a normal chicken. Now, this daily position of the chicken on this buffer is extremely important. Not only do we have the mechanism that when you transition from green to amber, you start thinking about what is wrong, what can go wrong, and when you transition from amber to red, you actually act. What changes is the way retrospectives are conducted. So anytime you have a green to amber transition or an amber to red transition, the Scrum Master or the project manager would fill in a line on a reason log. So during the stand-up, on the day that this transition happened, you would ask the team, why did we get in amber? Why did we get in red? And you would collect these at the end of MMR delivery. You would do a retrospective, a frequency analysis, maybe root cause analysis on that, and you would have a very precise indication of where you could improve. But remember the purpose of what we're doing here. We're scaling this up to the program level. Well, first of all, the program level was very happy when we showed the results of this effort of going to the MMRs. We counted a 70% reduction in, Andy, what did we say now? Flow time, timing process, lead time. Anyway, the time it took to deliver the work. And because when you're using Little's law, the time is at the denominator, the throughput went up to 200%. And when business hears that, they certainly have your attention. Now, that was one key to get management's attention. But at the same time, I don't want to forget that we had the team becoming more and more happy by the more relaxed way of working. So this way of using visualization also started to trickle up into the program level steering committee. And we have here like a portfolio board where the big white cards, there are even other colored cards, but the key concept here is that the big white cards, like this one, represent business epics. And the small yellow stickies are the MMRs. Here we have the MMR definition. Here things go to the team. Here single MMRs are delivered. Here a business epic is fully delivered with its own MMRs. Schematically, the program level board looks like this. And what is most important is this in progress column. Why? Because there we can make the connection to the local Kanban boards and especially come up with this kind of reporting representation. Remember, we are at the program level, so here we're looking at a multitude of teams, at a multitude of projects. And again, we're reporting on the buffer consumption. Team C, you can see it's going fast. Every bubble represents a reporting period. Here, the steering committee met every other week, so we are having a period of 6 weeks being reported here. Team C is going fast because these bubbles are 4 apart. It's progressing quickly towards delivery. Team B has been recovering from a bad situation. Team A is going very slowly. The bubbles are close to each other, and it's going from amber to red. So this is where we make that connection. We give management a tool to focus on whatever it is that at that moment is mostly impeding delivery of results. With this report, management could ignore what is happening in Team C, could say, okay, B is fine, but what shall we do with A? Management attention, remember, one of the scarcest resources in any organization. Now we have a tool to focus their attention. These concepts, I like to remind, are part of TameFlow, my book, which will be published soon in paper edition. It's currently out as an ebook. And some of these things you will not find in the ebook, but in the next printed edition that will be out in summer. And at this point, we went up yet another level. Dragan?
Back to the future. So I was talking to Dan North earlier about what term we should use because management became a dirty term and now leadership is becoming quite overused, but we'll stick with leadership. The leadership attention, management attention being scarce in most organizations, and a couple of the previous speakers talked about go and see approach of management in different in different guises. We had the MD of the online division come and see the first team that started on this journey and really liked what he saw. He really liked the transparency, the inspection and adaptation, the fact that the team was collaborating, and he really wanted some of that. He wanted some of that in his management team, in his executive team. So there's the pool created from the top of the organization, at least that division, where they wanted to get a bit more agile themselves. But when we started talking to them, it also became absolutely obvious that they also needed to do something to support the teams and programs so that the teams and programs could do their job better, could deliver better, and also should change their behavior in the way that the organization gets more responsive for the clients. So hence the engagement at the leadership level that Ratak started having a few months ago, that resulted in this board, which is in the MD's office, which is really the leadership Kanban, if you will, to some extent. A bit simpler, because they need to understand it. On the left are the executive change epics. So what are the things that the leadership team can do, to either help the teams and programs or move the organization to a better place, to a more responsive place. And then each one of these has the acceptance criteria. It's expressed in the familiar way of a user story epic, has acceptance criteria, and is broken down into a number of tasks. And then those tasks make their way onto the board in some sort of priority order, where they are to be done, in progress, ready for verification, or done. So this is the way of visualizing management support and management change, if you will, to the executive team, but also to anybody else who is involved in those conversations. So this is in progress. And now we've kind of come the full circle from the team level to the program level, expanding both on the team level and program level, and started working with the leadership level. So what are the next steps? So this is not really a part of the predetermined grand plan. It is all to do with us going through it and coming up with what are the next things that we should tackle. So Discovery Kanban is something that we are looking at, and we feel the need to introduce, because the stuff that's coming to the teams need to be better shaped, better prioritized, more ready for the teams to pick it up and do it. Secondly, Steve alluded to it earlier, prioritization is something that really needs to be improved to again drive what is being done. And we're looking at the sequence adjusted net present value, cost of delay, and the throughput octane as the methods. Unfortunately, we won't have time to show you any of those, but maybe we could have a separate conversation about it. And finally, we're starting to evolve into other geographies and potentially even out of the division. So all naturally, organically driven by the pool created by what has been happening so far and successes so far. So by way of summary, because I think I'm about 10 seconds away, the starting small worked for this particular organization because it suited their way of looking at suitability and sustainability of the change, and then scaling up and across. Evolving organically, so what is the next natural thing that would add value? What do we need to tackle? Not a big bang up front, but what step-by-step change. Pavel was talking about behaviors earlier and the difficulty of changing behaviors. I would agree, it's not easy to change behaviors and make that a long-term sustainable change. But what you're doing is you're changing behaviors by showing different results of the new behaviors, and therefore creating a virtuous circle to changing some of the beliefs. Look what we have achieved. We never knew that that would be possible. Maybe we should continue with this a bit longer and see what happens. So it is focused on behaviors rather than on changing the culture or the values or the beliefs. And the pool is all important. You don't need to push any, you can't push any change to people, and you all know that. You've been there, you've tried it, probably some of you. You need to show the results, and that creates the pool. And that probably ends up our talk, except if you think I've forgotten something important.